Hello everyone. So I hope you're fine, that you're ready for this class. So this video is the correction of the article that I gave you. So this article is about the protest against the construction of a pipeline in Canada and more particularly in British Columbia. And this is opposing the government and the company to some First Nations of Canada. So to understand the issue behind and to understand the different sides, the different targets and goals, so we need to identify or to have some more information about the politicians that are involved in these issues. So obviously you've got Justin Trudeau, who is the Prime Minister of Canada. He has been serving as a Prime Minister since 2015 and is the leader of the Liberal Party. Here you've got Mark Miller, who is also a Canadian minister, and is in charge of the Minister of Indigenous Services. So it means that he's in charge of taking care of the different services that are available in the reservation. Is responsible to provide the same services to these Indigenous people, the same services as the other citizens. So this minister has been restructured and really has been and was restructured as a minister in 2017, so very recently. Before it was just a portfolio. And so the fact of having this minister also shows that the Indigenous people are still victim of discrimination or are not enjoying the same rights as the other citizens, and this is it shows that it is still an issue today in Canada. So next, so if we focus on the coastal gas link pipeline, so you can see that this is a project which will enable the company to provide safely provide natural gas to the coast. And it is a huge project as it is it's really expensive, and it's also really long. So it's more than 670 kilometers long. So this is really important economically speaking for Canada, because as it provides natural gas to the coast, it will enable Canada to open its trade to the world and to be open internationally and to sell its gas internationally. Right? So the project is crossing some territories that belong to some 20 First Nations of British Columbia, like the Mohawk or the Wet'suwet'en. And so we're going to see that this is what causes this is what causes the problem and the debate. So that's why some First Nations are protesting against this construction. So, and the First Nation who is concerned is the Wet'suwet'en nations. These people are living in British Columbia, and they are accusing the company of trespassing their territory, their land. And what you have to notice, and what is very important, is that their land has never been ceded to the government, has never been ceded to Canada. And while they're doing this, they accuse the company of destroying the environment and natural species. So they ask the company to stop the construction, and they ask the company to withdraw from their land, because there is a physical occupation of the land with the machine at the moment. So to put pressure the government and on so this is the map of the construction, and here so you can see that this is the Wet'suwet'en traditional territory, so junction 6, 7 and 8. So to put pressure on the government and to put pressure on the company, so they have decided to protest, and so to protest they occupy railway lines, and they also occupy BC legislature, so to prevent railway transportation and to also prevent and stop political activities and political speeches. So by doing this, by doing this, they also want to draw attention to their protest. They want to draw attention to their issue, and more globally to make their protest visible on a national scale, and to point at to underline the issue of the indigenous land rights on the globality. But this protest creates debates and creates division. It creates division in the nation, because people don't agree and they don't have the same opinion about this protest. And it also creates division within the First Nations of British Columbia, because you've got a very complex system in how tribes and these indigenous people or indigenous organization. So indeed, you've got an opposition between the elected band council, and you've got a reference in the text. So the elected band council can be opposed to the hereditary structure of the clan and of the tribe. So the elected band council was established after the Indian Act, and is supposed to have the authority over the reserve, and but they don't always have the permission from the traditional authority structures that are represented by the hereditary chief. So here in this case, the elected band council agreed on the construction of the pipeline, but the hereditary chief of the Wet'suwet'en nation don't agree on this, and this is why there is a debate within the indigenous people. So this is the context, and this is very important to understand the article and to understand, to be able to answer the three questions that I asked. So the first quote to comment is this one by the government or Mark Miller said it. So this is an issue, and this is hiding an underlining issue which didn't rise yesterday. So you've got what is important here is to focus on this idea of yesterday, so this idea of past. Indeed, the government stresses the fact that the relationship between the government and the native, so not the natives, this is for the US, but the relationship between the government and the indigenous people is really tense, and this is because of the past, and this is because of the sequel of the past, or we can also talk about the burden of the past. So we've got an opposition between the colonizer and the oppressor and the victim of this oppression that happened in the past. And now today it's still visible, and the sequel and the trauma of this past runs really deep within the indigenous community. And so this past is in a way spoiling the relationship that they can have with the government, because there is still resentment, and it prevents the government and the indigenous people to have a safe or to have a positive relationship. So the issue of the pipeline is hiding all this, and the issue of the pipeline and the protest is for the indigenous people. It's not a pretext, an opportunity for them to make their history visible and to make their rights visible, and to be aware that to make people aware that their rights of the land is not always respected, and here in this case is not respected. So next question. So here it's a woman, an indigenous woman, who says, but they continue to complete acts of genocide when the rest of the world isn't looking. So I underline two keywords that you have to work on and define, and use your definition to answer your question. So here, genocide and continue. So genocide, it's this idea of deliberate, massive killing of a certain ethnic group or religious group. And the goal of a genocide is to completely erase this group from the nation, from the state, from the country. So it's extremely strong, and it's also very politically and historically connoted, because we associate it to other events in the past. And this idea of continue means that you've got a link between the past and the present, that the issue that she's referring to is not something new, and it's a continuation of the past into the present. So what she wants to underline here is the hypocrisy of the government. Indeed, in 2006 and 2007, they have signed a Reconciliation and Truth Commission with the indigenous people. And in 2007, Justin Trudeau delivered a very tearful speech about how Canada is sorry for the black for a part of the history where the Canadian obliged indigenous children to go to some residential school, and this was part of the assimilation policy to kill the Indian in the child, as they said. So the women here think that these promises are not respected, and for her, reconciliation in this situation is dead, because the rights of indigenous people are still violated today, and this violation of the rights of the land can trigger a potential death of the indigenous culture, land, and it can also cause death of the indigenous people, because they strongly rely on the environment to survive, and they are also extremely victim of climate change. Right. So this is why she's saying this idea. She's mentioning this idea of continuation, because she thinks that what is happening today is a continuation of the colonial and corporate government genocide policy.